and again, I didn't really realize it as a kid because I felt like I was pretty active and everything, but I didn't know what it was like to not have a stomach ache. So that was my norm.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't have said I had a stomach ache.
Right.
Because I didn't know.
And isn't that interesting? Like there are points along the way as you get well where you didn't even realize all of what was going on until it's gone.
Yes. All right, welcome back to the Mind Change podcast, and this is episode 2.
Episode 2.
And my co-host is McKenzie Brewster.
Hello.
Hello. Okay, so let me just address this now.
Yeah. I thought you
Okay,
would.
co-host.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to have you co-host every single episode,
I'd love that too.
and I know that that means some things to different people. For me, I'm going to call everyone who comes on here my co-host,
Yes.
unless, of course, I have you as my co-host and we're interviewing somebody.
Right.
But because I want people to feel like they are co-hosting. This is for everybody.
Yeah.
And it's a conversation. And so I will probably be referring to everyone who comes on as my co-host.
And there you go.
But I think you'll be on more
Probably.
because we've
wanted to do this for
a long time.
A long
Yeah.
time. Yes.
Okay. So today I'm talking about my story.
Mm-hmm.
And so, this is interesting for me and continues to be interesting for me because to talk about how I got here is difficult, not because there's shame, blame, not because I have emotion around it anymore, because, and I know this is really difficult for people to fully understand, I don't resonate with it at all anymore.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel real. Mm-hmm. And like we talked about in episode 1, chronic illness used to be a bit of an identity for me.
Yeah.
And so I was able to speak with it. I was so well versed in my chronic illnesses that I spoke with it with such ease, with such research into it. Like the verbiage I used was, and it just, it just feels like it's so not a part of my identifying story anymore that I find it's not my most favorite thing to talk about.
Yeah.
But I know that I need to.
Yeah.
Because people need to hear that I'm coming from a place that they may find themselves right now. And I am thinking back to, if I can remember back to whenever I was doing these chronic illnesses and was feeling very desperate. Mm-hmm. It's hard for me to access that in real time of like, what did that feel like? So I can kind of imagine what that would feel like, that desperation.
And I love that you're saying that because those are some of the specific nuances of the difference of what we do.
Right. Yes.
Is you don't have a reference where that's all of that is being recreated chemically in your body anymore.
No.
So you don't, it doesn't feel true because it's not being produced in your mind the same way because it's being held differently.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I know that that is a foreign concept for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And even coming from that place of chronic illness where I was, hearing that may have been a little like, wait, you clearly aren't where I am.
Right. There can be a little bit of a, I find this sometimes there can be a little bit of a pull into needing to prove credibility. Because
I really was sick.
For people who are there, because they'll be like,
Yeah.
oh, well, you weren't really that sick.
And isn't that an interesting side note? That in the chronic illness community, there is that like push and pull of, well, are you really as bad off? Are you as sick as I am? Are you as desperate as I was? It's this kind of level of where you are in that story. Unconsciously, I think.
Right. Well, because I think a lot of the things from which those chronic illnesses can spring, one of the components I found to be common is this feeling of being misunderstood.
Oh, yes.
And
unheard.
And unheard, right? Mm-hmm. Yes. And so our bodies are speaking. And so that's part of what's being represented.
And so a number of the things that I was doing were autoimmune disorders.
Right.
And those are tricky, although so common today, more than ever. And in fact, I just was in one of the courses that I was doing, a little bit of research, putting it together, and autoimmune disorders have risen like, I think 40%. 40% in the last, I believe it's like 9 years.
Wow.
So, and that 80% of all autoimmune disorders are done by women. Women are primarily who this is attacking, if you will. So I know that this is a really important conversation.
Right.
And we want everyone to know that they're welcome in this conversation. But I do feel like I need to say that when I talk about this story, it's not as real for me anymore. I'm just really not invested in it at all anymore. So, but I understand that I was at one time deeply invested in it. And so I do want to share it because I think it's important that people know where I'm coming from and how I came up with the mind change method to begin with. So I'm going to share my story. Please, as you will, ask questions
and guide you. Well, it's interesting because people from the who are listening won't know this. I've known you for most of my life. I think since I was about maybe 10 or 11.
10 or 11, yeah.
11 years old. I didn't move to Georgia until I was 11, and that's where I met you. Yeah. So as long as I had known you, you had health issues. And you were one of the first people that I met. We'll get into this later because there's an influence here.
Always keep it real. Yeah.
Of had health issues. I'd never known somebody to have you were the first person with celiac that I knew. You were who had an autoimmune disorder, back problems, back surgeries. I remember one time you sharing about all of the accidents that you had been in, and I was floored that one person could actually have had that many huge injuries, like the time you fell in the tub and you're busted your head open, and all the horses that you fell off of. And I mean, there's just a lot. And I watched you when you were first trying to get pregnant, and all that was happening there and through your first pregnancy. And then you moved, but we'd keep up over the years. And I remember seeing you about the time that I was doing, really getting into one of my sickest points was right before you nosedived into where you were on your way to dying.
Yes. And
then I saw you, I don't know, 2 years later, maybe a year or so later, and you were mostly better.
And when you were in one of your worst points.
When I was in one of my, yes, I was still using a wheelchair primarily at that point because I was too weak. I couldn't barely stand. I would just collapse.
Yeah. And then I was
yeah.
Really on my way.
Me out.
Yeah, I know.
It freaked me out. I would try to talk. I would what's this thing that you're doing? And I'd start to reach out to you, and then I would completely pull back. But anyway, I say that to say I have seen you through so many different stages of illness and of wellness. So, okay, I wonder, is it best to start at, I think often when I hear you tell this story, you start at when you hit rock bottom.
Yeah, that's usually where I start.
Yeah. Okay. So what was going on and what were you dealing with? Because there was stuff, like I said, I knew you, but there was a lot I did not know the extent to which you were doing what you were doing.
And it sounds, I get it now. It sounds like no one person can have had that much stuff going on.
Yeah.
And really, when I was doing all that stuff, I kind of felt like that too. How is this happening?
Yeah.
And yet I had a medical file the size of probably 4 stacked encyclopedias that there was proof. The blood tests, the x-rays, the MRIs, all of the results that proved these things were happening in my body. right? After a while, because in the beginning, there were conditions that I was doing that it's like, how do you prove chronic fatigue syndrome, right? It's a collection of symptomologies and everything.
Right. Well, sometimes it's like it's a name that's given to describe a handful of symptoms that are happening. And I don't know, the extent of the diagnostic tools that they use now for some of these things, like certain hormonal levels, et cetera. But
sure. And in the beginning, that was a little bit of my journey. I had a lot of accidents. I was a sickly child, but I would never have said that because it's your norm. I didn't know other people didn't have antibiotics on hand all the time.
yeah.
Like, I took so many antibiotics. I compare and contrast my children and their relationship with antibiotics to mine as a child. And I was like, oh, holy cow.
Yeah.
There was a big difference. So, and again, I didn't really realize it as a kid because I felt like I was pretty active and everything, but I didn't know what it was like to not have a stomach ache. So that was my norm.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't have said I had a stomach ache
Right.
because I didn't know.
And isn't that interesting? Like there are points along the way as you get well where you didn't even realize all of what was going on until it's gone.
Yes.
That still happens to me sometimes where I'll work through something and I'm like, oh, this is how good I can feel. Oh, I thought that was the baseline. I thought where I was before was normal. Oh, which
yes.
can sound, depending on where you're coming from, can sound discouraging or really encouraging.
Yeah, depending on the framework
Right.
that you put that in. But so I do want to say it's not like this stuff. And for some people, it is a sudden onset, or is it? Did they have stuff before?
Yeah.
I really did think I had a sudden onset.
Yeah.
Of bigger things going on, but realizing now, like as time has gone and I've kind of been able to step back and look at the story a little bit more fully, I was like, oh no, I'd been doing stuff for many, many, many years, really my whole life. But starting back to worst part of where I was.
Yeah.
And I am never wonderful with dates, but I believe it was 2012 that I was at home sitting with an IV drip in my arm and with the whole thing. And it was December because I remember Christmas was coming. And the reason I was at home and on an IV was, this is the doctor's, my blood was as thick as molasses.
Yeah.
You know, whatever that means. But I was also just fresh off of coming from the hospital from being in liver and kidney failure.
You were taking so many medications, weren't you?
Yes.
Yeah.
These are the things you don't add up until after. And so there was, and so many people have taken issues with this when I've said this over the years because I've spoken about it, but I counted. They were there. It was real. And why I ended up in liver and kidney failure. Can we just say, like, I get this now?
Yeah.
Why I was in the, in that stage. Because I was on 180 different things a day. It was a full-time job keeping up with medicine. Now, for all those people, no, it's not possible. And the nurses and everything, before you comment, let me explain. That was when I counted up every pill, every shot. I was on multiple injections, tinctures that I had to take, drops for this, supplements for that. So it was all of that stuff, but 180 things that I was ingesting or injecting every day. And I had been doing that for about 3 months prior.
Okay, can I just want to say this because this is the place for open conversation, right? There's a part of me that hears that and thinks that's just bad medical care.
Yes.
like if I were hearing this and I'd be like, well, duh, that's just bad medical care.
It is bad medical care, but this is where we're at in the world right now. And so let me explain that because I don't blame the doctors at all.
Yeah.
Or even the pharmacists because I actually had to go to 3 different pharmacies to get all of these things because this one was a compounding pharmacy and this one they didn't, I had to have like a 3 signed script to get these particular painkillers or these things because they were so, what is the schedule?
Oh, I know what you're
Schedule
talking
3,
about. Yeah.
something like
I
that.
don't remember. I don't
Back
remember
in the
anymore.
day, I used to be so versed in this, right? Like, I could just tell you, but I can't tell you anymore. Anyway, I had to have 3 signatures to get certain medications because they were so heavy duty.
Yeah.
So I didn't have one particular pharmacist looking through all the stuff. I also didn't have one doctor.
Yeah.
I had a rheumatologist. I had a Lyme disease. So I would say the one that probably did oversee, or at least then ended up hooking me up with, oh, and now you have this, and now you have this, and now you have this, and so go to this specialist and this specialist. And this specialist was my Lyme-informed doctor.
Okay.
So I had been diagnosed with Lyme disease, which I feel like was the deepest, darkest rabbit hole that I went in my health journey. But that's where I was at the time. And I was in Northern Virginia. Man, I'm telling you, Lyme, capital of the... I moved to Northern Virginia.
I don't know. You should check out New York.
Oh, probably, right.
Yeah.
Right out, like upstate and everything. Anyway, where people kept telling me I had Lyme disease. Like the community that I was in, they had me come and sit and watch a documentary of like, you have Lyme disease, right? Because why don't you watch this documentary called Under the Skin, I think it was called. Okay. Where I was like, I think I do have Lyme disease, right? Because it's such a catch-all for everything that's happening. So I had been doing so many good chronic illnesses at the time. And this is something we do languaging wise.
I was gonna say, I feel like at this point early on we need to catch and we
Yes.
should explain.
So it is my belief
Yeah.
through experience,
Yeah.
personally, client experience, and a ton of research. Read the book and look at the back of the book because the research is there. I don't believe we have illnesses and diseases as much as it's something that we're doing, because it takes an enormous amount of work for the body to produce the amount of symptoms that it takes to be caught into some of these diagnoses. And we're doing it successfully.
And when you say do, and again, I want to catch on this, right? Because there are all kinds of things that can mean to a lot of different people, right?
Yes.
Yeah. You don't mean consciously.
No,
Not at all. There's no intent
no.
whatsoever. There's no, like, you're saying that this is, when you say do, you mean this is being produced from within?
Yes.
By your mind and body, essentially as a survival strategy, which sounds like, how is this a survival strategy? But we're going to look at later on what makes that up, how there's a part of your brain that makes connections to act in what it believes to be the most logical way possible. That's a different kind of logic than we use consciously, that there's a lot that informs why that would be produced.
Exactly.
Okay.
And why I do that, and it's so intentional for me, and it's so important because we talk a lot about entry points into this work.
Yeah.
And they're going to be different for a lot of different people.
Totally.
My mind change moment, the thing that changed in my mind that then changed everything in my body, was this understanding. I'm doing this. It's not being done to me, and I don't have it. I'm doing it. Because then my mind did something that I can't quite explain. Other than to say, and I listen, for those of you who aren't there yet, I get this because it sounds a little woo, but it is so important to me now. Some other part of me, component of me, which I believe is energy or spirit, followed this next sentence because my mind never would have done this by itself because of who I was. I was so negative. I was very, again, things I was doing, negativity. I don't feel like I was inherently negative. I had learned that over the years. It was a coping skill.
Absolutely.
To not be disappointed. And it was a good thing I was doing for a while.
Yes.
Where I was at the time and to deal with my history and my childhood. But before, and I had doctors tell me this was all in my head, and they nearly got punched out, right? Like that is one of the most insensitive, triggery, awful things that you can say to someone in chronic illness is that it's in their head.
Yeah.
But it is.
But it's not just in your head.
It's also in your body, and it's also in your spirit and your energy, and it is.
Right.
But oh boy, I did not need that said to me. And I don't believe it in the way that it's usually coming.
Yes.
Okay.
It's a different thing. I don't even know what to say. I'm missing the noun, but
yes. Okay. And here's the science piece of it. And it's very basic science, but 95% of our actions, reactions, thoughts, feelings, and output. When I say output, because I often explain mind change in a computer analogy.
That's right.
It is not a metaphor. It's not perfect. And there's a
Sure.
lot of pieces of it that don't really fully work, but it's such a good one still. So I do that. We are a product. Our output, what we think, what we feel, what we believe, is really because of what's been input.
Yeah.
And so often not in our awareness, not consciously,
Right.
not anyone's fault.
Yeah.
We will never do fault here.
No.
Fault is not the only reason you'll hear me say fault is to say we don't do that. And we're not looking for it.
Right.
And it's not where we operate from.
Yeah.
But we do operate from responsibility.
Yeah.
And there's a really big difference. And I cover that in the book. I talk about the whole thing. So I'm not going to rehash that here. But my subconscious mind had very good reason to be doing chronic illness. Mm-hmm. But that thought, when I heard and conceived, wait a minute, is it possible that I'm actually doing all of these things rather than their conditions that I have?
Yeah.
The next step that my brain made, which I believe is actually my little gut spirit that was still a small voice that hadn't been heard in so long, my intuition said, but if you're doing it, you can stop.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, and I'll tell you, I got goosebumps all over my body. And I know it won't be the same for everybody, but for me, that was my mind change moment. And I went, okay, then I'm not a victim anymore.
Right. Because it connects you with the ability of, it connects you to power that you didn't have before. You were completely helpless. Now there is something you can do.
Yes. The medication was not it.
Yeah.
The doctors were not it. Not that they weren't trying.
No,
I'm
everyone's
never
giving you
going to
their
look to
best.
vilify. I've never met a doctor. I know they're out there, but I've never met a doctor who was like, I don't really actually care about people. I just want to medicate them.
Like, right. No, everyone's operating from, they're really doing the best they can with what they have and working in their absolute best knowledge.
And they may have sold their soul to big pharma, but they don't even probably know that. You know, like that is just, the things weren't working.
Yeah.
But what if the power was in me? That changed for me of, oh, if I'm doing this,
Yeah.
I have some measure of power to stop it. Changed everything.
Yeah.
It really changed everything. So back to being hooked up to an IV.
Back to the low point.
Where I had a cardiologist because I was doing, I'm going to have to look up the list of things I was doing because I don't remember it anymore.
Yeah.
But I can tell you my big five.
Okay.
Lyme. Mm-hmm. And, oh, guys, was I doing it good. I was doing it so good. That's the other thing is I'm amazing.
Yeah.
I created and did diseases that I had never heard of.
Yeah.
And I did them so good, which is now translated into I'm actually really amazing and can do big things with a little bit of information.
Yeah.
So I was doing Lyme so good to my Lyme disease doctor. She was like, I've never seen so many co-infections in one person. You have, I can't even remember the name of it now. The most strains of Bartonella, maybe it's Babesia, I can't remember. Anyway, that I've ever seen, ever, in all my work in Lyme.
Congratulations.
I know, right? I was like, wait, do I get some sort of really sick medal for that? But anyway, let's just say I was doing it really, really well.
Yeah.
But that Lyme disease diagnosis, and I had felt this so many times when I got the chronic fatigue diagnosis, I was like, oh, good, this is the answer.
Yeah.
And no, of course it wasn't. Celiac disease. Oh, this is the answer. If I just avoid gluten, my whole life is going to be better and change. No, endometriosis. If I just get the surgeries, then I'm going to be all better. No. Okay, fibromyalgia. Ugh, no. The injections, the whole thing. Rheumatoid arthritis. It's like
What about your back and your neck too?
Yeah, that was a whole other thing. So I'm like collecting all of these, diagnoses of autoimmune disorders and all of these big things. And also, I've got this, I had neck and back pain, so much pain. It's one of those things too, when you live in chronic pain,
Yeah.
you don't really even realize how much pain you're dealing with. And it was such a normal part of my life, but I had had so many surgeries. And I had seen a spine specialist and a neurologist, actually, because I was having some neurological issues and nerve issues and everything. This was way back in 2000.
Yeah.
So this kind of tells you. Now, I'd had multiple accidents, which you mentioned before. You guys, some people get the idea that they're clumsy.
Yeah.
Because of so many accidents. I didn't think that I was clumsy. I had no idea why I kept having so many accidents. I'd broken so many bones. I'd rolled down mountains with horses, been life flighted places, so many casts, so many things. But I ended up going to a spine specialist who diagnosed me with degenerative disc disease and told me this lovely little tidbit that I had had the spine of a 70-year-old.
And how old were you at the time?
26.
Okay.
Fun, right?
Good times.
Told me you should never ride another horse again.
You were a horse trainer.
I was a horse trainer.
Right.
If you have another fall, you could be paralyzed for the rest of your life. That's how fragile your spine is. Ooh, fun belief systems around that. Like, what? So many things of that nature.
Can I drop in a couple extra things that I remember?
Please,
Okay.
yeah.
One I'll drop because this will be a connection point for later on. You did POTS, right?
Yes.
Postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome.
Also known as dysautonomia.
Yeah, a form of dysautonomia. And what's the other thing? Tzatziki? No, didn't you had some like, did I just say a kind of yogurt sauce?
Yes. I did have that for dinner last night.
We did. We had that for dinner last night. No, but there was some like random, like African, like you're like that you had to specifically have gone to the continent. You're like, I've had no contact with anyone where there would be any level of exposure to this. I've been home. Where how could I possibly be testing positive for this disease?
Yes. And it was
Or viral infection.
Oh my gosh, now I can't even remember it. I had an African strain of
I don't remember.
Oh my goodness.
I don't remember.
See, you just don't remember this stuff. The doctor was like, so when did you go to Africa? I was, I've never been. Now I since have lived in Africa.
Right.
But at that time, no, I don't think I'd ever been out of the country other than Canada at that time. I was like, no, I've never been. You can't have, it's showing up in your blood that you have this strain of African, whatever it was. And I was like, I've never been to Africa. So that's the thing. I was doing so many crazy things.
Yeah.
And POTS was a big one. That's where I had a cardiologist, so that was big. Oh my goodness. So many. I could go through the whole list. Maybe I'll just put the list.
Yeah.
Or it's in my book. So many things, you guys. No one would ever think one person could do so many symptoms and diseases and get the diagnoses and everything like that. But I was doing it. But what I realized, back to laying on that couch on an IV drip where I have two toddlers watching this, having to navigate around me. And the back condition had gotten so bad at the time. Even after numerous surgeries, I had spinal fusion, I had all the fun stuff. The pain was so bad I couldn't be lifted up out of the bed, or I would just scream.
Yeah.
And I fancied myself to have a high pain tolerance, I think simply because I'd done so many things and been through so many things. But I was practically immobile at that time, in the bed,
Yeah.
at home on an IV drip, really doctors saying, I don't know that there's much more we can do for you. I'm in liver and kidney failure.
Yeah.
Because of all the medications I was taking.
Right.
Which I believe now, that is the sole reason. But coming off of the medications had all of these implications. Like, well, you'll die without the medications. But some of these medications had death. Death was a
possible
side effect.
Yeah.
Blindness, going deaf. these were the things. I had to go in and get checked. I had blood work being done weekly.
Yeah.
Weekly. I was being bled out practically to check to make sure, which is how they caught the liver and kidney. And my blood was as thick as I went in for the weekly.
No wonder.
Whatever. And they're like, we can't get your blood out. It's so thick. Bam, to the hospital. You know, oh, you're in liver and kidney failure. All these different things going on. Then back home on an IV drip.
So you're there.
I'm there.
And what happens from that low point that is the next step that ends up somehow bringing you towards being so healthy now?
Yes. A doctor came to my house and was doing some body treatments and stuff on me because I couldn't really leave my house at that point. So, and he knew, you know, he was one of those guys that had just seen everything that I was trying. I think he felt desperate for me too.
Yeah.
And he said, have you ever heard of EFT? He said tapping. Have you ever heard of tapping? And I was like, no. You know, and he's like, I don't know, maybe you should just check it out. I don't know. And so I did. I went ahead and Googled it, right? And I think I came across the tapping solution, which is the Ortner's. Okay. And come to find out, it's really from the modality EFT, which is emotional freedom technique. And so it was one of the first times that I heard a connection being made that maybe trauma from your past could have some impact on what your body was doing.
Yeah.
In all the years, I did have a friend who had mentioned it. I remember she was like, come and sit in my sauna and do this detox thing and maybe grab a notebook and write your history. Like, I know you've been through a lot. And it was the first time let me tell you, I tried that and I flared so
I bet you did.
Badly.
I bet you did.
That it sent me into another kind of just trying to think a little bit about the past. Listen, I tried to avoid the past with all that I could.
Well, you didn't really have any tools to be able to process it yet.
No.
So that would have been,
No, and I didn't see how it could, how I was like, hey, I'm here. I have a husband. I have kids. I'm not addicted to anything. I'm not beating anybody up. I haven't lost my job. You know, I'm like, I'm so much better off than my family.
Yeah.
My past, I've overcome. See, I'm not doing it like they're doing it. I've won. I overcame. So I don't think my past has anything to do with what I'm doing now. I just didn't make the connection.
Yeah.
And so there had been little whisperings and little attempts at that conversation. I just don't think I was ready for it yet. In the realm of this EFT, I heard this other connection. Really, I will say my first even dipping my toes into the mind-body connection.
Yeah.
And there were things that I heard there that piqued my interest. But there were also things that I heard there that I was like, for instance, this whole, I don't know if you're fairly familiar with it, with all the tapping stuff.
Yeah, it's acupressure points.
Right,
but there's something
on acupressure points.
About trapped energy.
Yes.
Okay.
That's the concept of EFT, is that there is trapped energy in your body.
Which, now knowing what we know, actually there's a piece to that which is true.
Sure.
But it was a little bit more vague, I think, right? There wasn't...
I didn't know anything about energy at the time either. I was like, what is energy?
It sounds pretty woo, as opposed to like, here's what your body, the energy from which you needed to rise to action in a traumatic situation, and you haven't gotten to carry that out. Anyway.
It didn't. Some of it resonated. A lot of it, though. So then it was like, okay, so... and I don't want to mock it because, listen, it helps a lot of people, so that is not what I'm trying to do right now. But for me, I saw someone going, this pain, this pain, this pain. This
and for
pain,
our listeners,
pain.
Heather is now tapping at the top of her head with one hand and then moving down to the side of her face and then under her eye and then
it would be under my rib.
Under her rib,
and then on my hand. And so watching this, and you're saying this pain, this pain, this pain, you know, like...
It's like playing Simon Says or something.
It was, and then they were like, and so you'll have to do this for every traumatic event that's ever happened. And I was like, I will die sick. Yeah. Like, I don't think that's going to work.
Yeah.
So, but it gave me this little piece of insight, like, well, maybe my body does have something to do with this, and maybe my past and what's happened to me is having something to do with that. And I will say, holy moly, that's what just threw open the floodgates.
Yeah.
And I started really diving into that. And what I found was some great information. And I applied it, and it helped me so much. And I would say EFT was where I started, but then it wasn't enough.
Yeah.
And it wasn't enough science for me, I have to say. I was like, yeah, but I don't know why. And it's working for some people and it's not working for others, and it works for this, but it doesn't work for this. And I wanted to know why.
Yes.
And so I am a researcher at heart. I didn't know it though. I didn't know. I started making my health my goal, my research, which I know a lot of people do anyway.
Right.
And boy, do we find
you were doing that.
I was doing
in
it
a different direction though, with a different kind of energy. Again, we're saying energy, but like a different spirit of focus.
a different motivation.
There we go.
And in fact, what it helped me do is be a lot better at my diseases.
Yeah.
And to be a lot better at the conditions that I was doing at the time. And starting to feel like, oh, that's my next step. And then, oh, lo and behold, I would develop the new symptom by reading the blogs and listening to the things. And I just felt there was some measure of other people understand.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize that's actually what I was looking for.
Right.
And thought I was finding that in these online communities of chronic illness. I was looking to be understood.
Yeah.
But I didn't know I was actually looking to understand me.
Yeah.
And I thought I was still outsourcing to other people, which we'll talk about. I was still looking for that through other people and didn't realize that was actually the answer was going to be inside of me.
Yeah.
So I was settling. But I didn't know it at the time. And that was my journey. And it was those little pieces that helped along the way. What ended up happening was that I dove in.
Yeah.
And I kept, what I really was diving into was this piece of this mind-body connection piece. So you get into the EFT and you get into the Reiki and you get into the body work side of things. And there's a lot of interesting stuff there. And I picked up a lot of great stuff there, but I was like, oh, there's more. There's another component that doesn't feel like it's being addressed for me. And I went to the science side of it. So I became the armchair expert in neuroscience and brain development. And I sat in that for a long time and picked up pieces there. But then NLP was such a huge piece for me, neuro-linguistic programming. Yeah. I realized, the words we say do something in our mind, which does something in our body.
Yeah.
And I'm like, whoa, so interesting. So dove into that. So I just ended up deep diving into all of these different areas.
So you were looking at, okay, here's how the body works, here's how the brain and the mind work, and then how do they work together?
Yes, and I realized nobody I knew, I looked, was having a cross-pollinated conversation.
Yeah.
The energy people were staying in the energy field, and the yoga people, and the movement people, and the somatic people were staying in the somatic conversation. But then the science and the doctors and the researchers were staying in the science and the doctor and the research. And I was like, but hey, I was able to start putting pieces together. And I will say the mind change method came together. It was like seeing a puzzle.
Yeah.
When you realize like, there's a picture.
Yeah.
This piece and this piece, that makes a picture. And I realized, oh my gosh, I know how we do this. I know how we do everything we do. I know how we do the outcome of any outcome. I know how it got produced.
Yeah.
And I know how we can change it.
Yeah.
And everything came together. And then I was kind of like, wait, someone else has got to know this, because it can't just be me that knows this. How did I figure this out? Right? You do all of that stuff, but that's where I was.
Yeah.
And to this day, I still don't hear anybody putting the pieces together like we've put the pieces together. Then the other component was, listen, it worked for me. I was well off of all medications, which, boy, guys, I titrated. Please don't go off all of your medications. Please don't hear me say that. Mental, I was on all the antidepressants, and I had done my opiate journey and everything like that. That's no joke, man. Don't mess with that stuff.
Yeah.
Work with a medical professional
Yeah,
to get off.
you worked with you worked with your doctors.
That is the beautiful thing, Mackenzie. I was shocked by this.
Mm?
They worked with me to get well.
Yeah.
I was so shocked by and how excited they were that I was getting well.
Did you have a part of you that had this anticipation of, because you kind of came to a different mindset, because you were doing it in a different way, it almost felt like it was contradictory to what they were saying, that there was going to be some level of pushback?
Oh, I thought there would be so much pushback. I thought there's no way I'm going to be able to get off of this stuff. I thought they'd fight me.
Yeah.
They didn't. And I'm not saying there won't be doctors out there that won't fight. Mine didn't. Okay, so much so. I love to tell the story of the cardiologist because he was he was like one of the #1 cardiologists on the East Coast.
Okay.
But he's a low-key, like, a part of a secret society.
Oh, you've told me this before.
Yeah, that like knows how powerful our minds are. And like, he got me into the office. Mm-hmm. Because I went for my yearly checkup where I have to be there for 3 hours and do all these tests and whatever. But I went in going, but I'm well.
Yeah.
I'm well now. And there's so much story around that, guys. Anyway, so many good pieces. But
I know we only have so much time per episode, but we'll keep talking.
Yes, I'll skip to the part where he brought me into his office and was like, I believe you. I believe that you're well and I want to support you. And then he's the one that told me this beautiful piece of, we need to get your body to catch up. I believe that your mind is well, and I'll support that, and we'll get you off all your meds, but you need to know your body. It took your body a while to get where your body is, and your body needs some time to catch up. And I had realized at the time, like, oh yes, my mind was, I know, my mind is how I got to do all this stuff, but my body obediently and lovingly followed.
Right.
And it needs some time to reverse that. So he did that. Now, the other crazy thing was the Lyme disease doctors ended up sending me clients.
Okay, so let's pause for a moment. And so you come to this idea, and I know only so much time, we're going to get into later more of the mechanics of some of this, right? But you came to this idea, what if I'm doing it to me? What if this is coming from within? And then started finding some practical tools, started finding something that helped you work with that. The mindset shift itself was enough.
Huge.
That health started coming, but then what you needed to help carry that out, you started to find your way to.
Yes. And I say this with it's one of those things I almost don't want to say because it's going to mean different things. It's going to actually mean something to somebody that I don't mean for it to mean, but I can't control the way that someone takes this.
Can you say what you can you say both? Can you say what you don't mean, what you think someone might think, what it's not, and then say what it is?
Yes. I had to deal with my past.
Yeah.
I had to go in and deal with the trauma.
Yeah.
I did first admit that it was there and start seeing it from a different perspective. Now, my mind went to, I'm going to have to sit in therapy for so many years. And I was like, I know people who sat in therapy. Some of the people who sat in therapy for years are some of my primary offenders. How is that going to work?
Yeah.
I just had this like, nah, that can't be the answer.
Yeah.
I don't see it working.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm not saying that it isn't a good tool for some people.
Right.
Some people need it witnessed. And I think that's where talk therapy has a beautiful space that it can hold. And we'll get into this at some point. But beyond that initial witness, I know I know brain science. Right? Brain science says the more that you repeat the story, the more you actually deepen it, and the more that you make solid neural pathways that are going to be more difficult to change.
Yeah.
So, and I knew enough at that point to say, but I did need, how am I going to overcome this stuff from my past?
Yeah.
And I looked and I didn't see answers. And I was like, that's not it. And that, because I had this informed piece of what our brain is doing and how memory plays into it. And
right,
what
that
memory
was
is.
kind of one of the foundational pieces, starting to understand, oh, this is how memory works. This is how my brain takes in information, and then how it's processed and produced through my body. And so as I heal, and you didn't quite know how just yet, but as I work with what's there from my past, then the natural progression will be that my body will come into alignment with wellness.
Yes. And I will say I found pieces. I always want to give credit where credit is due.
Yeah.
Because I did pick pieces up from a lot of different modalities.
Yeah.
And realized, but that's again where those aha moments came in. I was like, okay, let's take EFT.
Right.
EFT works so well for some people, and it covers some really great stuff. Okay, why? But I also want to talk to the people who it doesn't work for.
Right.
And why?
Yeah.
And start putting that together. So EFT it really informed my journey, as well as faster EFT informed my journey. But there were pieces that I was like, some of this stuff is going to circle you back into sickness, and those are not okay.
Yeah.
So it's take the meat and spit the bones.
Yes.
Even though I'm plant-based.
Of all the metaphors,
for me to choose. Yes. Spit the grit, whatever that is. And there's a lot of grit, right? There's a lot of other stuff in there. But that really informed part of my journey. The other thing is NLP was a huge piece for me. And again, though, there's grit in there.
Yeah.
Some of it it's not the whole story.
Right.
EMDR is another modality out there that is really working well for some people. And so those modalities were big pieces. But then there was something that really helped inform my journey was polyvagal theory.
Yep, mine too.
I was like, oh, whoa, things started to really come together.
Yeah.
But I can tell you, if I would have just looked at polyvagal theory, it wouldn't have gotten to where I got. I needed all the little pieces.
Right.
So that's the beauty of my book.
Right.
I will say is I did all the work for you. And I pulled the pieces and put them together. Attachment theory.
Yes, that's been big. That's been really big.
Me. Somatic experiencing. Big piece too. I was like, okay. And some psychology. Yeah, for sure. Come on. Like, I'm not going to say psychology didn't have a huge piece.
Right.
I took a Harvard course on, oh, geez, Louise.
I remember when you were going through
math.
that.
I'm like, wait, how does math have to do with psychology exactly? But anyway, I really wanted to cover as many bases as I could to make sure I was as informed as possible. But the modality that I used to get well and stay well, and boy, what I mean by that is so much more than physical.
Yeah.
That conversation is so deeper. It's so much deeper for me.
Yeah.
So going back to what I don't mean by I dealt with my past.
Yeah.
I didn't let it become an identity. I didn't shift from chronic illness to, oh, I'm a victim of my trauma.
Yeah.
I see that shift.
Yeah.
And I realized, luckily with as informed as I was from all the pieces that I took, I realized that could have been an easy shift.
Definitely.
And I could have identified now as a trauma victim. And I got to just skip that whole thing and become trauma informed.
Yeah.
And start looking at it from a lens that I actually cherish.
Yeah.
Which is, everyone was doing the best they could, and I can take the wisdom, and I get to keep the wisdom, and I get to be victorious through all these stories.
Yeah.
And I see all of it, and it's just, I can't even tell you the effect that it has had on me spiritually, which I didn't expect. I will tell you that right now. I did not expect the spiritual side of this to be as big as it's been for me. But also my mind and my body.
Yeah.
And so that's the beauty of the mind change method, is it really is holistic in the way that it takes into consideration each piece that makes us us.
Yeah.
And how we human.
I wanna come back to what kind of launched us into this particular thread. So you're pulling from all these different things and finding a way to work through your past really effectively, and great health is emerging, right? It's just inevitable at that point. That's also what you're working towards, right? It's not like what a nice little secondary consequence. Like, you're doing it for this is how I want to be. This is the kind of healthy body.
That's what I thought I was after.
So much.
Just
intention.
health.
Right.
The other health.
Right.
That's what I thought I was after.
Right. But then the overall wellness, the spiritual health, the relational health, all came as a part of it as you realized, oh, this really is about wholeness.
Yes.
But you got to a point where you knew enough, right, that you started kind of experimenting with other people.
Well, when someone as sick as I was got well,
yeah,
it got some attention.
Right. I think people in your community were like, what happened? Because you went away in one state and you came back in another.
Yes.
And you can get into that. I wanna circle it to your Lyme's specialist started sending their clients to you.
Because nobody else was getting well.
Yeah.
And I did.
Yeah.
And I sat with them actually and explained. I was like, this is the piece of this, you know, and I have to say, and this is where I really have made a lot of peace with the medical community, because even prior to, like, when I was entrenched in the medical community, I had a really negative view of doctors and of this, you know, it was gross. And here I was at their mercy, putting myself in that position, right?
I'm smiling because I'm like, I understand the metaphorical implications of all of this.
Yes.
We talk about that.
Yes. And again, that's not the problem. They're not the problem.
No.
But they're not the solution either.
Yeah.
So, but I got to sit down and talk, and they were just so excited to see someone well, which gave me such hope and heart. Like, okay, that is what you're in this for.
Right.
And they were almost like, I care less about how you got there, and I don't have any medical background or degree or whatever. They're like, is it okay if we send people to you who want to get well? I was like, please send people. So my first client that I didn't know came from the Lyme community.
I just want to pause for a moment just to like appreciate the heart and humility of...
Oh, that makes me a little emotional.
Yeah, me too.
That is huge. Yeah.
Like that's like it's really that level of care. That's really what people want. And for there to be no sense of identity and this is what I'm supposed to be able to do.
Yeah.
Right. But just like the motivation is so pure that when it's seen, the just wanting to share that, the acknowledgement, but that's just.
Well, thinking now to where I'm at now, how many of my clients are doctors?
Yeah.
And psychologists and psychiatrists are my clients now.
Yeah.
I think that piece of knowing, oh my gosh, they are so desperate for people to get well. They are heartbroken that what they've dedicated all of their time and energy and schooling and stuff to isn't helping that many people. They are heartbroken. There's a lot of tertiary trauma, which is trauma that you're getting from the people that you're holding their stuff because you so desperately want them to be well, and you're just hearing every time you see them they're worse, or you're hearing another aspect, you're having to diagnose them with another thing. They are heartbroken and discouraged. But yes, going back to that doctor, and it was a team of doctors who were all really supportive of that. And my first client was a chronic Lyme person in their, what was she, in her 50s at the time?
Yeah.
Who'd been doing it for a long time.
Wow.
Who even at this time I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know. It worked for me, but maybe I'm weird. Like maybe it's just like, I don't know. Can this work for anybody else? Now I had worked with some friends too.
Right.
Like I had a friend come to me. She's like, listen, oh my gosh, she's one of my best friends, and she had been doing such hardcore insomnia. You'll hear from her. We'll talk to her.
Oh, yeah. Oh, she's become one of my most cherished friends now.
Yes.
Years down the road, I had no idea, and then we ended up connecting.
She was like, will this work? I was like, I don't know. Let's try one session, McKenzie. It's just still mind-boggling at this time with how little information I had.
I know.
And in one session, debilitating 5 years of, the most chronic insomnia. One session. I was just like, wait, what?
Yeah.
I still had a hard time believing, even now. Oh my gosh, now we hear miracle stories on the daily, and we were talking to some friends collectively who are all in this together now of and I had to speak it out loud. You guys know that we're sort of desensitized to miracles. We hear it so often. We hear stories of victory and overcome that people aren't really hearing out there so regularly. We have to keep remembering that what we have is something so special.
Yeah.
You know, and the reason why, part of the reason for the podcast, right? Like, how do you, without being weird and cheesy and like marketing, I don't know. I'm just a little bit of still, listen, marketing is great. And all you marketers out there, you're wonderful people.
We appreciate the way that you do your job and connect people with the thing. I don't need to make a pitch, but I have the same sort of relationship with,
It's not my motivation, but I want people to know about this because healing is out there. It's real. And it's so much more than you think it is.
Yeah.
And anyway, oh my gosh, we could keep going, right? But we need to, we've got more. So we've got more episodes. So you better subscribe so you don't miss one.
That's right.
Yeah, right.
Yes, subscribe to keep joining
Never
us
thought
and
I
to
would be
continue.
the one to say that.
Me either.
Look at me learning marketing.
Hey.
No, but see, we can all change.
When you started this conversation today,
Yeah.
you shared how you don't really identify with your story as much. It takes a little bit more effort to remember it. And even as we share along the way, right, you're like, okay, here's how bad it was. But then there's instantly the like, here's how wonderful the doctors were. Here's how I found the victory. Here's what was fascinating, right? There is that positive association. But you said that that's not really like, it's not as interesting to you to talk about that because it's like, it's not real to you in your body. I wanted to maybe open up the door to give you the opportunity of like what you really enjoy talking about. We've gotten into some of that because it's the, you know, the science and the mechanisms of all of how this works. But what is your life now that you do identify? Like what feels true now? Like what is your daily, what is your spirit? What is your body? Like what is alive within you?
Yeah, something I really couldn't have conceived. It's so hard to talk about. It's so hard to talk about simply because like, how do you explain to someone who is in a crisis of health or relationship or mental, you know, like how do you explain to someone there that within you already now,
right,
where you're at, in that, there is this piece, these pieces that when they come together and you realize who you truly are underneath all of it, and what power you actually have, it's I don't know, it's like a star trying to talk about itself. Like, how does a star exactly talk about its power, right? You know, it's like, that's the thing I like to talk about more now is how it's like, guys, this isn't real. It's very matrixy. It's a movie I will often, because I'm like, it's not real, guys. Like all this stuff.
Okay, what is real to you now? Like, what is your life like now? What kind of things do you get to do? What's your health like?
Oh my. I mean, listen, it's not like I don't pop a headache off once in a while or I do, but I have such a different relationship with my body now.
Yes, I feel like that's helpful. It's not like, and everything was, I mean, sometimes it can almost feel and seem magical because the reality is so different than the reality that we'd lived in previously.
Yeah.
But it's not like, and then I never had any more issues ever in my life.
Well, that's kind of what I was talking about a little bit was like, I thought where I was going was like not having diseases.
Yeah.
Like, or feeling a little better. Maybe having one.
Yeah.
One that was manageable, like that I could take just a couple things for.
Sure.
And, like that to me, I would have settled for. Oh, I'm so glad I didn't settle.
Yeah.
Like I'm just done settling. I didn't know that it would change, that I would end up living on a tropical island. Not that destination is everything.
Right.
Having a community of friends that I'm like, who are these people?
I think...
Like, these people who I feel like they're Midas touch people, like anything they touch, it's like magic, gold. They're creators. They are. I'm like, how am I in this group of people? Not that I second guess myself anymore, which I used to. I'm just like, I can do anything basically. I just like, what? It's just such a flip of story. It's such an opposite that it feels like it's not even on the same plane.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's where I get excited about it.
Yeah.
But it's hard to put into words. It changed everything. Everything. The way I see my past, the way I create my future, the way I am present in my body. It's just like hopefully in this podcast, we'll start to see those goalposts along the way
Sure.
and that I didn't even know existed.
Yeah.
And how different life is. And it's just so different that I couldn't have said then. I couldn't have even known. You couldn't have told me. I would have thought you were talking about fairy tales.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have accepted it then. And I'm so much beyond that now.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question.
It helps. Yeah.
But it's that's what I like talking about.
Mm-hmm. I want to add in too, again, because I have the privilege of having known you for a really long time and getting to watch your journey, sometimes more closely and then sometimes coming out and then popping back in, that it's been really cool to watch it continue. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't just the physical healing, like you said, that was huge, but I've gotten to watch, this one makes me slightly emotional. I've watched the quality of your relationships change, and the amount of help that you can receive, the amount of love that you can receive, the amount of presence that you're able to have, your relationship with work transform, how that's informed how you are with your daughter. That to me has been equally beautiful and equally amazing. Yeah.
All those, it's just pluses added, it's the cherries on top in so many ways.
Yeah.
When I never thought I could even sit at the table for the Sunday, just all those belief systems that kept me thinking that I didn't either deserve or something was wrong with me, or all those stories, that just are not, I talk about them because I know they're there.
Yeah.
They don't feel real. I have no access to those stories anymore. I know that's hard for people to believe. I would have had a hard time believing that when I was in it. But now we have hundreds and thousands of people who know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And so I can't wait for there to be millions more.
I like thinking about that world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How much it's going to, changing the world. One mind at a time.
One mind at a time.
There's the tagline. Okay. Yay. Episode 2.
There we did it.
Done and dusted.